Hello, everyone. These are trying times, and we have a upcoming budget on the 1st of February. There are a lot of expectation, as is the case with every budget. But this budget is important also because the statement of spending plan by the government in such a scenario becomes even more closely watched, and there is an air of anticipation, quite rightly as well. We have here with us a veteran economist and former governor of Reserve Bank of India, Dr. C Rangarajan, who has looked through the whole journey of Indian economy through the pandemic and even before that, and is perhaps best placed to guide us in terms of what to expect from the upcoming budget, and what realistically is possible and what he thinks ideally should be done really. So thank you so much, Dr. Rangarajan, for your time. Um, it's very nice that you've been, despite your busy schedule, take time out for this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Doctor, we are talking in terms of this pandemic scenario. How has the pandemic impacted you personally?
Well, the pandemic has affected everyone in one way or the other. And it has basically confined everyone to their home, or at best to the city in which they are living. So I have rarely traveled outside of Chennai during this entire 2-year period. And there have been many, many days where I have not even stepped out of my apartment. That's one thing. The other is the Madras School of Economics, with which I am associated as a chairman, had to undergo various changes in the light of what is happening. Therefore, all classes have to be online. Even exams were being held online. And we found out that the students who were admitted to the MA program last year have not seen the institution at all. They probably may leave the program, complete their degree without having ever come to the institution. So the institution will be something that they have seen only on sheets of paper, or seen the photograph of the school. So I think everyone had to adjust to the new situation in which one has to communicate only through online and so on. I have given many lectures during this period, and I've talked to many conferences and all that. A webinar has become a common thing these days. But then one has got to get used to it.
Every year budget is there is a lot of anticipation. But do you think what concerns you at the moment?
Well, I think one impact of the COVID-19 had been to slow down growth. Virtually at the end of this fiscal year, we will be where we were at March or April 2020. The budget or the policymakers in general need to do two things. One, accelerate growth, and at the same time, lay the base for a faster rate of growth thereafter. Therefore, one major question that arises in the context of budget making is the rate of growth of the economy in 22-23. I think without some assessment of where and how the economy will grow during 2022-23, we cannot really think about what should be done in the budget. Therefore, I will first take up for a few minutes the question of what the rate of growth is likely to be in 2022-23. The original projection for the current year growth rate was 9.5%. Then we had written earlier, a colleague of mine and myself, that it is unlikely that 9.5% will be achieved, because we felt the rate of growth in the second quarter was not as high as one expected it to be. Therefore, in the second half of the year, the expected rate of growth was about 6.8%. We did not get that. Therefore, I feel that the rate of growth of the economy in the current fiscal will be around 9%, or it can be even go a little below 9%. With this in mind, let's proceed for 22-23. The best that we can achieve in 22-23 is 6 to 7% in real rate of growth. But as far as budget is concerned, what is relevant, particularly in terms of raising taxes and in terms of expenditure, is not so much the real rate of growth, but the nominal rate of growth. Because all tax calculations are based upon the nominal rate of growth. Therefore, I would think that the budget should plan on a nominal rate of growth of 12 to 13% next year. This would imply somewhere between 5 to 6% in inflation also. Therefore, the critical variable to think about is the nominal rate of growth of the economy in 22-23, and that I would put somewhere around 12 to 13%. To answer your question regarding what the level of expenditure should be, what the fiscal deficit should be, and so on, one needs to first of all get an idea of what the revenue collection is likely to be in 22-23. You know, the revenue performance during 21-22 of the central government was really very good. The revenue growth was very substantial, and what we call the gross tax revenue increased by almost 50.3% during the first 8 months of the year. In fact, in the first 6 months, it was even higher. Then it started tapering. Therefore, I believe that during the year, it may be about 35% over the gross tax revenue growth rate. Even this is very high. This will give you a buoyancy, tax buoyancy of 2. I would expect that this will not be maintained, because if the tax buoyancy is 2, then if you assume the 12 to 13% nominal growth rate, then the revenue should grow about 26%. That I don't think will happen. If you look back and see the performance of revenue, I think best we can assume about 1.2%. I'm sorry, not percent, 1.2 is a buoyancy. Then we will get a revenue projection of 15 to 16% in 22-23. I would assume the budget makes a calculation, makes the calculations on gross tax revenue growth of, as I mentioned, 15 to 16%. So anything more than that, I would assume is very optimistic. And obviously, as you mentioned, that there are people asking for concessions on the taxes and so on. Perhaps some of the concessions granted may have to be extended, particularly in the context of the compulsion to have a higher rate of growth in the economy, and also to provide a relief. For example, the corporate tax reforms, which were announced before the advent of COVID-19, could not take off because of the intervention of COVID-19. Perhaps that may have to be continue beyond, because the earlier the production has to take off before 31st March 23. That may not happen, and therefore I would think that the date will have to be extended. Therefore, I would say that while some specific sectors of the economy may need some relief, and therefore the government may want to think about it. But by and large, the tax rates will have to remain more or less where they are. I mean, I don't think this is a year in which we can give away too much. Therefore, I would go for a gross tax revenue growth of 15 to 16%.
Doctor, if I just to recap the important numbers that you've said, the current year, the expectation was 9.5% growth. But you're saying that we will not touch even 9%. Maybe we will just reach up to 9 perhaps.
Correct.
And in the 22-23 year, which you're saying is very important, we can at best touch a real growth rate or a growth rate at constant prices that they say as 6 to 7%.
Yes, correct.
But in order to have a bit more impactful year, you are saying that the nominal rate of growth, which includes also the inflation rate, should be something like 12 to 13%.
Correct.
In 22-23. But you are saying there is one big challenge in trying to do that, is that the current year and the revenue collections, which were essentially because of the tax collections, which were a bit more buoyant this year, which you say at the buoyancy rate of 2, which you said actually may not be sustainable in the coming year as in 22-23, because going by the rate at which we have normally done, which is around 1.2 is the buoyancy rate, you're saying at best we can have a revenue growth of 15 to 16%.
Correct.
If I've understood the numbers correctly.
Right. Correct.
So all of this means that the fiscal space for the finance minister is even further reduced.
Well, I think it is the fiscal space for expenditure is also related to what one should have to say on the fiscal deficit. So the revenue growth combined with the fiscal deficit will give you the level of expenditure. I will go to that presently. I mean, what I would really think the government should be doing. But let's go a little bit on the expenditure side. I mean, I think let's on the expenditure side, the priorities are very clear. I think there are 3 types of expenditures which have come on top of the regular expenditures because of COVID-19. First is the healthcare expenditures. The second is the expenditures which are required in order to meet the impact on vulnerable groups. And the third is expenditures which are needed to stimulate certain sectors of the economy which have been badly affected because of COVID-19. These are the special types of expenditures which have to be incurred on top of other expenditures that are normally done. And the other thing is that one important thing is that the expenditures, if they are to lay the base for faster rate of growth of the economy in the coming period, also should focus on capital expenditures. There has been a focus on capital expenditures last year too, or in the current year too. The infrastructure pipeline needs to be carefully looked at and perhaps augmented. I think that is very clear. Therefore, besides the 3 types of expenditures that I talked about, the 4th type of expenditure is increasing the capital expenditures in general and also looking at the infrastructure pipeline more closely. The expected budget deficit for this year, or the originally budgeted fiscal deficit, was 6.8%. Revenues have been buoyant, but some of the non-tax revenue may not necessarily be up to the budgeted level. It's not very clear as yet how much of this investment will be made. It's not clear. Some of how much of the monetization program that they have been talking about will have happened. But given the buoyancy of the revenue, let us take it that they would probably keep the budget deficit at 6.8%. Therefore, going ahead, we need to give a picture that shows that the government is also keen on fiscal consolidation. I would therefore think that the budget deficit this year should be lower than the budget, not this year, in the coming year, should be lower than what it was in the current year. And that is, I would say that it should be somewhere between 5.8% and 6%. I am saying that that should be a 1% reduction in the budget deficit. 6.8% anyway is a very high level of fiscal deficit. After all, the mandated or the implicitly mandated budget deficit is 3% of the GDP.
If I may therefore ask, you're saying that while the mandated fiscal deficit should actually be around 3%, we are likely to in this year see a budget deficit of 6.8%, which is quite high.
Oh.
But you're saying that there should be a signaling in terms of fiscal consolidation, and therefore in the coming year at least there should be a 5.8 to 6% fiscal deficit.
Correct.
And perhaps that should be a roadmap towards leading to 4.5% planned fiscal deficit by 25-26, which they have indicated.
Yeah, that is if in the coming years they keep reducing in each year by 0.5% of the GDP, but then you will get to that number.
So in the light of this point, Doctor, when the revenue buoyancy, the tax buoyancy and the revenue collections are likely to be low, when the fiscal deficit is expected to come down even further, then what is it that the man on the street, the people from the industry can expect from this budget?
No, I think the expenditure levels that we are still budgeting, that the expenditure levels that would come as a result of this is still be high. I mean, I don't think, because we have even the revenue buoyancy of 1.2, which I mentioned as the likelihood, is not the usual thing. There have been years on which it has been less than that. Therefore, 1.2 buoyancy gives you a 15 to 16% rate of growth in the revenue. What is important is how do they adjust the expenditures, or how the composition of expenditure turns out to be. That is where some serious thinking will have to be done. Give priority to some of these expenditures which I had mentioned earlier, including capital expenditures and healthcare expenditures, reaching out to the vulnerable groups and providing stimulus in certain cases where the sectors have been seriously affected. Perhaps the credit guarantee scheme, which was introduced last year in order to take care of MSME, should be continued. I think it was originally intended for only 1 year or something like that. Therefore, it should be continued. So those are the things that which have to be taken care of. So I don't think that the level of expenditure that I'm talking about is not adequate to meet the needs. The government and others will always be happy if the level of expenditure is even higher. But the point really is that this still allows the budget to have an impact on growth. I think growth depends upon a number of things. The private investment also should pick up. The investment climate must be created, and it depends both on economic and non-economic factors. All that is very relevant in terms of ensuring that the rate of growth of the economy picks up in the subsequent years. Therefore, in summary, what I would say is that the budget should aim at accelerating the growth in the coming fiscal, lay the base for further growth, and give out a signal for fiscal consolidation. Give sufficient amount of capital expenditure is incurred by the government, then it will also, in the current situation, stimulate private investment. The link is very close. If the railways expand, then it creates a demand for steel, it creates a demand for X number of things. Therefore, previously people used to ask the question whether public investment is replacing private investment. That may not be the case now. The case may be the public investment can be a stimulant of private investment. Therefore, if capital expenditures are incurred, that is a good example of the way in which to create demand for capital goods, to create the demand for machinery, and so on. And therefore, the private investment also will pick up. To me, in the final analysis, growth is dependent upon the level of investment. And the level of investment, once again, depends upon what the government or the public sector does and what the private investment does. If the budget pushes on the capital expenditure, in the current situation, it will act as a stimulant and a catalyst for private investment, and the two together will be able to pull the economy out and achieve a higher level of growth. We have lost 2 years, and therefore, if the economy has to move on, it is extremely important that the capital expenditures of the public of the government is increased, including, I think, not only the government, but also the public sector organizations. And that can, as I should mention to you, in the current situation, push the private investment also. Therefore, that's critically important if you really have the growth objective in mind. So I am looking only for the situation in which the government really takes care of the kind of expenditures that I mentioned, including the capital expenditures, and also send out a signal for fiscal consolidation.
There is this issue of polarization of wealth. We are seeing the wealthy getting even more wealthy, whereas those at the bottom end are actually suffering a lot. Is there anything that the budget can do to correct this?
The polarization has happened particularly because the COVID-19 has impacted much more the vulnerable groups like the daily wage earners and others. Therefore, in a sense, if you succeed in getting the growth rate back to 6 to 7% in the coming year, some of the bad effects of COVID-19, which were seen in the last 2 years, can be overcome. I think what we really need to do in India is really to achieve a high rate of growth in the economy. And through that high rate of growth, try to take care of the vulnerable groups through variety of social safety nets. Let us understand, it was only in the high growth period we were able to introduce the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. We were able to introduce extended food security. And the poverty ratio did fall at that time. When we slip from the high rate of growth and stagnate around a very low rate of growth, we will not be able to achieve it. And therefore, the best answer lies in high growth. And growth is the answer to many of our socio-economic problems. Some of the incentives that had been given earlier should be continued, because the termination should not be this year. If these incentives have been offered, as two examples that I mentioned, one is the corporate tax rate changes that were made, and also the credit guarantee scheme. All these need to be extended. So that is the direction we should move. I think more important during this year is the level of expenditure and the composition of expenditures.
Very important. I think the level of expenditure, composition of expenditure, very important messages from this. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your time. It's been a great learning, and I just hope some of these get reflected in the budget. Thank you so much for your time, Doctor. Very kind.
Thank you.